Kela Kestavla Nazmiut. Greetings, all my relatives. Namiyut, we are all one. And that's a core value that we've adopted at Reconciliation Canada. And it's a really powerful spiritual imperative to be able to say that we can, when we want to, be able to say that there is love among us. I know love doesn't have a whole lot to do with finances and funding or anything, but it's so important to think about it. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator and panelists for this session, but I just wanted to say a few words. I've been involved in the evolution of the apologies and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and everything that's happened in the last 2.5 decades. And I wanted to tell you today that reconciliation is underway in this country. Inarguably, it's underway. And it's really important us to be able to affirm that, all of you. You're not here by chance. You're here because you're interested in the amazing work of the First Nations, I have a hard time remembering, First Nations Major Coalitions project. I'm amazed at this project, that it can call us together, because one of the things about reconciliation is that it has to call us together so that we can have dialogue. Before we move anywhere from where we are, we have to create dialogue that creates meaning. And with those things in mind, transformation can happen. As we have dialogue and we have a deeper understanding about each other and we recognize that we share this place together. We share Canada together. So I'm always inspired when I get together with people like yourselves who actually care about our common humanity. That's so important to be able to do that. Most times, a lot of people simply focus on their own individual sort of humanity and their own individual purpose. And we need to be able to have a worldview that says we're in this together forever and always. It doesn't matter the creed, the race, the color, or anything else. If we want a better future for our children, we are in this together. And I think one of the comments I want to really make today is that for all of you, reconciliation is very personal too, very individual. And if you're going to embark on that journey of reconciliation, you must and you should adopt that as a core value, Namuyut. We are one, we are one. It's an ancient old Kwakwaka'wakw word that's used in everyday greeting. But what it says as well is that we are one with the universe, that we are one humanity, and that there is only one creator, one God, one great spirit. And when we begin to align all of those things, then we have the chance of advancing reconciliation in this great country of ours. So I'm really honored to be here, just to be among you, to listen to the fabulous presentations that have been made, and to appreciate this great organization that is bringing us together. So I'm going to introduce the panelists now. Alicia Dubois. She's a Métis and she's the Chief Investment Officer for Boan Social Impact. Alicia is an accomplished leader with pan-Canadian experience, building markets and organizations with a focus on inclusive economic growth. We haven't always had that, of course, and all of you know that. with shared outcomes, purpose-driven community engagement, and access to capital for marginalized people, especially Indigenous people in our country. Driven by her background and lived experience, Alicia's focus has been on advancing Indigenous peoples and communities and engaging and co-creating solutions with diverse sectors. I say that's pretty talented, and I can't wait to hear her. The next introduction is Sean Willey. He's the president and CEO of Desnedé Group of Companies. Sean Willey believes relationship building is the key to success. Since first joining the Desnedé Group as vice president in 2016, he has helped establish strong ties between our companies and Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners. So I think that's an absolute correct focus, building relationships. And it's not always easy. We haven't been talking to each other. We haven't understood each other, so there's been a lack of respect and just common civility toward each other. So as we move forward in the work that you're going to be engaged in through the years, building relationships, dialogue, building relationships, always. And finally, I want to call up our moderator, Dan George. He's the president and CEO of Four Directions Management Services. I've known this young man for a long time now. I saw him in earlier days in British Columbia, and he's been an amazing human being who has a knack for being able to talk to us, so to persuade us that we're better together as one, that we should meet and have real dialogue that changes our perspectives about each other so that we can really understand each other. With respect to reconciliation, it has so many, multiple dimensions, and every one of them are important. And so when I think about this organization, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, I'm so impressed and thankful that you're here to gather us in this moment. So I'd like to call on Dan to come up, please. Thank you.
Holy cow, it's bright up here.
It's hot.
It's hot too.
This meant the good-looking people up here.
Thank you very much, Chief Bobby, for starting us off in such a good way here. I want to begin by acknowledging that once again, the millennials have managed to shake things up. Over the past decade, millennials have gotten serious about investing, asking themselves, what investments help me build wealth and have a positive social impact? Investment decisions have traditionally been driven by financial returns, but a new area of investors have shifted to values-aligned investing. These investors are not only interested in maximizing returns, but also considering environmental and social impact, which are fundamental to relationships with Indigenous peoples. To discuss this trend, we have assembled a team of experts to share with us their thoughts on value-based investing. Joining me today is Sean Willey, President and CEO of Desnedé Group of Companies, Alicia Dubois, Chief Investment Officer from Boan Social Impact, and Elizabeth Wademan, President and CEO of Canada Development Investment Corporation. And in our app, we have more fulsome biographies. But prior to the formal questions, can you please share with the audience a little bit about your area of responsibility to enlighten our listeners? Starting with you, Elizabeth.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm wondering if it's that I just don't need an introduction, and that's why I wasn't included, but more likely because I more recently joined the panel as the recent announcement from the budget last week that the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program has been launched. And the delivery of that mandate is under the purview of my corporation, which is Canada Development Investment Corporation. And I'll give you a bit of background on CDEV. You may have heard of us, you may not. We are a federal crown corporation. We have been in existence for over 40 years. We have played a leading role on some of the largest and most complex financial structuring transactions in the country. And frankly, I think we are really the bridge of the private and the public sectors together. In addition to our financial advisory business, we are also responsible for the commercial holdings of the government. And so what that means is the CDEV group of companies, of which there are currently 6, we are responsible for over $50 billion of key Canadian assets. Some of those you're probably familiar with, the largest being Trans Mountain, Canada Growth Fund, and Canada Hibernia Holdings. I'm truly delighted to be here today. This is a real opportunity to talk about the launch of the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program that we will be setting up as our 7th subsidiary in the very near future, and look forward to delivering on that very important initiative, which is critical to unlocking Indigenous economic participation. But frankly, I think it's critical to the growth of Canada, the Canadian economy, and delivering natural resources to the world.
So thank you very much, Elizabeth. Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and pleasure to be back at the First Nation Major Project event, the best gathering of Indigenous business leaders in the country by far. Dennis Southlanay from the south side of Great Slave Lake. I grew up in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Yellowknife, and spent 10 years with Rio Tinto when we built the second diamond mine in the country, and then 10 years at Cameco, moving Cameco to the largest industrial employer of Indigenous people in the country. But being First Nation, wanted to go back and work for our own people. Met the great people of English River First Nation, which is the most southerly Dennis Southlanay community. And they had an unbelievable group of companies started up because they have the world's largest uranium mines in their backyard. And they've been engaged in economic development for over 40 plus years. And asked me to come up and help diversify their business. So at the time, we were 95% reliant on the uranium industries, and we maximized our rights and title to those operations, created employment, and created own source revenue. But with the market downturn in uranium, they knew they had to diversify. So over the last 7 years, we've diversified across the province and nationally. We now have over 20 assets. So everybody who's been drinking coffee here, it's Canada's first 100% supply chain where we buy coffee beans from Indigenous farmers and sends to South America. It's roasted on English River Reserve, south of Saskatoon, by English River band members. So that's all the coffee you're drinking to this conference. So we go from coffee companies over to large construction companies. Our oldest company is Tron Construction, mechanical piping, electrical contractor. We have still earth moving companies. We have a large retail footprint, about $40 million large. We have the only on-reserve liquor store in the province of Saskatchewan, which some people said, oh, how come you're doing that? And our elders have 2 philosophies: make money so we can have own source revenue and employ as many Indigenous people as possible. So 20 different investments to diversify. We just want to be seen as a tier 1 Canadian business who happens to be Indigenous owned, but with a name like Desnethe, it kind of leads that you're First Nation owned. And we'll get into our latest partnership is Cedar Leaf Capital. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sean. Alicia?
Thanks. It's too bad because we don't actually get a chance to really see everybody. It's usually nice to make a bit of eye contact, but I'll speak to the air and my panelists. Really pleased to join and to add a bit to the conversation about a sector of the financial industry that is only beginning to be talked about in gatherings like this. And so really pleased to be part of BOAN Social Impact. I'm the Chief Investment Officer there. And the focus at BOAN is to serve underrepresented people and regions across the country, and to invest in intermediaries that have similar impact criteria to us, and really see money enter the market in a it's not a new way, but it does feel like a new way when we're talking about Indigenous communities and access to capital for Indigenous entrepreneurs. So I'll get into a little bit more of that when we get going, but really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Alicia, and let's get going. I'm going to ask you the first question.
Okay.
And for so long, our people have been seen as a business impediment, but now we're seen as a business imperative. From your perspective, what does inclusive economic growth look like, and how would you define it?
Okay. So I would say economic inclusivity really is an all hands on deck. And that means, and this is sort of the beauty of this conference, because we see it in action here. We see all levels of government engaged. We see corporate Canada and various industries engaged. We also, of course, see Indigenous communities and entrepreneurs engaged. And we're starting to have conversations about multiple tools in the toolbox with respect to professional services and access to capital. And when you have that type of partnership and collaboration that is so multi-pronged, it means that there is more room for prosperity and shared outcomes. So rather than there, it being that single bottom line for corporate Canada, we're really seeing a shift toward the triple bottom line, where the communities that are impacted by the project or the work are highly engaged and equity owners and have a chance to be part of the supply chain. So you see that positive echo effect. And where we're having conversations about the environment, and we know what a strategic benefit it is to have Indigenous peoples at the table when we're talking about environment and how projects can come to be in the best way possible with respect to that connectivity that we heard from our elder.
Thank you. Prior to lunch, we had the Minister of Finance here speaking to the Indigenous loan guarantee. And many of you in the room here have worked long and hard to have that realized. So I hope you were as excited by the presentation as I was this morning. Elizabeth, can you talk about the Canada Development Investment Corporation's recent mandate to deliver the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program and how this aligns with the corporation's experience?
Right, that's a great question. Thanks, Dan. So I think we will bring together some of our core pillars of expertise. And we also recognize this has been a decade in the making. And ensuring that we get the right pieces coming together is critical to the success of the program. There's 4 key reasons why I think we are well suited and that we're very focused on, and which lends well to us delivering on the program. The first is we have been involved in some of the most complex financial transactions. We're known for financial acumen. We're very commercial at our core. The second reason is we have a track record of establishing subsidiaries, incubating and launching new entities based on government policy objectives. I mentioned earlier Canada Growth Fund. We launched that as one of our companies. Similarly, during COVID, we established the Canada Enterprise Emergency Loan Program, which was a loan administration program to large employers in Canada, which helped support some of Canada's biggest employers, including the airlines. The third reason, which is particularly germane to this mandate and to this entire room, is our work around Indigenous economic participation. This is a key area that CDEV has been incredibly focused on and remains focused on, and dates back to we helped on Ridley terminals. It was the first of its kind equity participation for the sale of Ridley terminals. We're very involved around the ongoing Indigenous economic participation models for Trans Mountain. And I think that expertise lends particularly well, obviously, to the understanding of this mandate. And lastly, which I think is critically important, is we are nimble and we move at the speed of business. And that is going to be, I think, a key area to be able to try to deliver on this program in a timely fashion.
Thank you very much. And Sean, in your opening remarks, you mentioned Cedar Leaf. What is Cedar Leaf and how did it come together? And what do you expect it to become in the future?
So Cedar Leaf, we were approached a couple of years ago by Scotiabank, our good friends at Scotiabank. And we saw an opportunity in the market to create majority First Nation-owned entity that's in the investment brokerage business. And so our goals there are to work with Canadian companies looking to secure debt. We're looking for issuers and investors wanting to enter the stock market. Of course, we want to train, employ as many Indigenous people as possible, because we know that Indigenous people are going into the schools now in higher numbers, especially Indigenous women. So we want to tap into that market and grow. The partnership is right now Desnethe, Enjkai, which is Squamish First Nation, and Rama First Nation. We own 70%. Scotiabank is backing it. They're providing the infrastructure, and at some point they will back out. But this is a model that's done in the United States a lot with diversity spend. And so you can be part of the large syndicates of the banks coming together and play in debt syndicates. And again, it's to allow corporate Canada, the sense I get, corporate Canada wants to spend money with Indigenous business. They want to be part of reconciliation. The sad part is a lot of CEOs tell me many of our companies just aren't there yet. So I go out and we want to try to create easy buttons. So I'll take that corporate spend. It adds to our diversity. And so it adds to that foundational pillar that we wanted to achieve. Because we were so reliant on resources up and down, we want nice, easy, foundational investments. And I look at the financial services industry as that business to be part of. And we have two great partners who in the Squamish and Rama. And people ask me, like, how long does this take? And I remind them that it took our elders and our past leaders 40 plus years ago, when they had the courage to get in economic development, that set the balls in motion for 40 years later to partner with one of Canada's big 6 banks on an equal playing field. And so it just didn't take 2 years from when Scotiabank phoned us and said, let's do something together. The community set these wheels in motion years ago, and I'm thankful for the efforts they did of being one of the more proactive, humble, and progressive communities in this nation.
Thank you, Sean. And to be successful, clearly it has to be community-driven and community-owned. So thank you very much for that example. Alicia, in your current role, you work to provide access to capital for marginalized people and sectors. And what are some of the barriers and some of the solutions for access to capital?
Okay, I'll focus on the work of BOAN and specifically the BOAN Social Impact, which is what we refer to as a wholesaler for the Social Finance Fund. And this is a fund that the federal government split between 3 different wholesalers. And just to provide some context to the structure, as a wholesaler, and that's a strange name, we actually invest in fund managers. So we do due diligence on fund managers that are then, and very specifically, fund managers that are focused on having social impact. And we also are looking at wanting to move the dial with social impact in very specific underserved regions. So that would be the North. We don't see a lot of social impact in the North, the prairies, and also Atlantic Canada. It doesn't mean that we don't do business with entities in Ontario and BC. It's just that it's a much more mature from Canadian standards than other regions. Social impact investing is something that is very mature in Europe and actually has a very long-standing mature history in Africa also. But it's new to Canada in this form. And so we're really grateful and honored to be able to be one of the wholesalers in driving impact. The beauty of it and why that matters to this audience specifically is that it means that when, and we're seeing a number of Indigenous fund managers, both emerging and more established, and they're beginning on their way. But we're getting to work with some that are very focused on providing capital to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And when you look at the underserved regions, these are areas where we often see the Indigenous communities are not maybe as engaged in regional economic development, or if they are, they're not I would say, in charge of what's happening in their region. And this gives them an opportunity to really drive their own prosperity in place, and that's key. Was at a panel during lunch too, and I'm going to try not to repeat too much of it, but ultimately, when we look at the impact of serving Indigenous entrepreneurs, it means that they are not looking to some of the big major centers in order to drive prosperity and be successful and earn a living. They actually have an opportunity to be entrepreneurs in place. And that in turn drives regional economic development that has a much more positive echo effect beyond just the activity of those Indigenous entrepreneurs, because they become engaged in the local economy. And when we think about, and I said this at lunch, if you look at the map that Mark Carney put up this morning, where he highlighted where all of the critical mineral potential sites might be in Canada, these are traditional lands of Indigenous people. And while there will be, phenomenal programming like through the federal loan guarantee, et cetera, to, support some of the engagement in bigger projects, what you need is the opportunity for Indigenous people to also be able to engage in the supply chain and for them to really watch their entrepreneurial spirit come to life. And so that's sort of the beauty. And we're actually working with an emerging fund manager. It's called Entrepreneurth, and I don't know if many of you have heard of it, but Boann is working with them as they build out their fund structure and their business model, all in hopes of supporting their efforts in driving sustainable regional economic development across the north of Canada. And so, this really then feeds into a lot of the procurement work. I'm the co-chair of the board for the CCAB and have been for a number of years. And for a number of years, we've been supporting procurement and partnerships through Supply Change, which is a program that we have. And there's a portal that's live where our Indigenous business members are able to connect with industry members in order to diversify the industry members' supply chain. And now this tool is one that actually enhances that picture. It allows a new approach to access to capital in order to really move the dial in that respect. The challenge about the traditional social impact space in Canada is that it's been really beholden to donations and philanthropic dollars. And so a really important component of the Social Finance Fund is that we create a self-sustaining social impact sector in Canada that lives long. So the government has injected these funds, and the purpose of these funds is to create impact, but to do so in a way that no longer requires and is beholden to grants and donations. And so there's some new learning for the longer standing entities in the social impact space because they haven't been through the formal due diligence process. They haven't been part of the formal investment process, many of them. And so it's an opportunity to learn, but we're really looking forward to being part of that journey, and in particular, of course, for me, supporting the Indigenous fund managers is particularly exciting.
Thank you. The title of our panel is Indigenous Values Aligned Capital. And what I've been taught by my matriarch and our elders is that we are the land and the land is us, where our identity as Indigenous people is inextricably intertwined with the land that we occupy. Elizabeth, having heard from other panelists and your prior experience, talk about how CDAV will approach the need to ensure Indigenous values are considered.
Yeah, that's a fundamental piece, frankly, to the success of the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. And just to maybe take a step back, we are tasked with this wonderful opportunity to develop and deliver the program. We're working closely with our partners at NRCan, who will be helping with some of the community facilitation. And frankly, I think there's a lot of learnings. So for me, it's about engagement and understanding some of the experiences from the provincial programs and recognizing things that, I don't need to rebuild the wheel. We can leverage off of that good knowledge, and also look for opportunities to stack with those provincial programs and other programs. I think it's about learning, and I think it's also about hearing directly from the communities and hearing, this is about self-determination, projects that are most important to those communities, not prescriptive from being told what to do, but really that it's driven within the communities itself. So when I think of this $5 billion envelope that's available, it's sector agnostic. Within natural resources and energy, that's putting the motivations into the communities themselves to advocate for projects that they want to see developed. And so for me, it's very much about thinking of the speed of business, but as I heard in a conversation with some chiefs this morning, the speed of trust and developing relationships and having and building that trust. And trust takes time. What we're trying to do is look at our foundational pieces and build trust as quickly as we can to try to get this program launched.
Excellent, thank you. And you identify some best practices there: early engagement, leading with questions, listening generously, and going slow to go fast, investing in relationships, because it's only the relationships are the real capital that we trade in. And you mentioned trust. Trust is foundational to us moving forward together as Canadians. So thank you for that, Elizabeth. Sean, I'm going to turn back to you. And how does Cedar Leaf support Des Nethe's growth, and how will it support other Indigenous groups' drive for economic prosperity?
And it's based on the topic at hand about our values, and it sort of ties into the question you're asking as well. Because we're grassroots owned, we're grassroots operated. We hold all the legal power, we hold all the political power. The land is so important in English River, and we own companies that we're going to start to utilize to properly land map, share that information with the rest of the world. So of course you need a foundational company like a Cedar Leaf that has those same values that come on. And we look long term on everything we do as a community, long-term investment. Cedar Leaf is gonna grow, and at the same pace that Des Nethe's is gonna grow. We wanna work with other First Nations. I must say that we're in a regulatory phase right now. We're gonna get permitted in fall. So I can't be promoting the business. So, okay, if there's any regulars out there, I'm not promoting the business. But as a First Nation, we always want to work with other First Nations. We think nation and nation is the way forward in this country. And by having a financial institution, I grew up in the north. Our community hunt, traps, and fish still. We want to work with other nations that still have that. We know where you're coming from. We know how hard it is to go through, and the barricades have been put up with us. So we want to grow Cedar Leaf, of course. We want to provide debt services, and in the future, equity services, both corporate Canada and as our First Nation businesses grow, First Nation businesses. So our community had the foresight to buy about 150 acres of land south of Saskatoon. And so it's almost self-serving that we need capital institutions. So we work with groups like Canada Infrastructure Bank, First Nations Bank of Canada, but now we can also work with the company we have 23.5% interest in. And so we're developing about $1 billion property south of Saskatoon. And it talks about the value of the community and Indigenous people and our relationship to the land. The city of Saskatoon is our neighbor, and they were never going to build wastewater and sewage systems onto the reserve because it wasn't their responsibility. It was the federal government's responsibility. So we went out and built a state-of-the-art membrane bioreactor on reserve land. The local rural municipality, in some jurisdictions as the county, came to us and said, you just unlocked vast potential for wastewater and water services. We've now been approached by EPCOR to build a facility that services 30,000 people. So this reserve land, now we've added an environmental solution because all the property around us is on septic solution, septic fields, septic tanks. We're going to clean all that up. We're going to hook all these people into our piping. Well, we need capital to build this facility, so hopefully Cedar Leaf, our own company, can help us with that project going forward. But secondly, we've quadrupled the land value around us. So again, it's that new adage that people are recognizing the value that Indigenous people play in this country, that we're not a hindrance to the GDP, that we're adding to the GDP. So that's where I hope Cedar Leaf goes, is to help us grow as well as other Indigenous communities.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'd like to ask the remind the audience to use the FNMPC app if you want to have any questions here. We have 3 very talented individuals here that would love to answer your questions. In the work that I do, what I've witnessed is that poverty has become normalized in far too many of our families and far too many of our communities. There's a legacy of mistrust, and then you combine that with our demographics where the majority of our people are below the age of 25, which are going to be the future workforce for this country. From each of your perspectives, what are the biggest challenges for true economic reconciliation to occur? Want to start with that one, Elizabeth? What are the biggest challenges for true economic reconciliation to occur?
Yeah, so I think of the resource-rich country that we have, and frankly, the way to unlock that is through Indigenous economic participation. Think of the billions of dollars of projects that need funding, but really only in consultation with and with support of those communities. So for me, this is a fundamental piece just to drive the economy, but also to drive Indigenous economic reconciliation. So I think, it's a complex issue. It's, and I sort of think from the financier's perspective, how can we add to that? How can we help in that equation? And so I think there's development around Indigenous economic participation models and programs like the ILGP, which can significantly enable wealth transfer and empowerment of communities through some of those mechanisms.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sean?
There's still lots of impediments, and I think, we have a challenge in this country where our population is based. 90% of it lives within 100 kilometers of the border. A kid born in Inuvik who's from First Nation south of Great Slave Lake. I see the majority of Canadians looking south when they should be looking north. That is the future of the country. But we need hard decisions made about infrastructure. Yes, it's going to cost more to build roads, transmission lines, power generation for northern Canada. It's going to cost more to educate our young people in those regions, but it's something we need to do. But I think organizations like the First Nations Major Project Coalitions, the number of, I would say, I'm always thankful for the past chiefs, elders, leaders who set the table for my vintage, our vintage, all my friends who are leading businesses that are now taking the next step. And we got another generation now coming up in schools that's going to take it further. So to me, it's an opportunity, right? We got to remove these barriers. I think we've done a lot of work at removing Indigenous people off the risk registry of Canadian companies, which we long existed on, they're risky. Now we're moving over to the value-added side. So I think that's a momentum we've all created. We never pat ourselves on the back, but it's working. Like Chief Roberts said, reconciliation is underway. And keep putting up those barriers because I know our people will knock them down.
Thank you. Alicia?
I think one of the biggest challenges is actually penetrating into the community and making sure that engagement, especially when we're talking about big projects, that the full community is engaged in that. And that goes from sort of preparing youth for employment. Projects take a long time. There's a very long runway to building a big project. And I haven't seen very many instances where the proponents and the communities have really embraced that and started to prepare the youth early to take advantage of being really meaningfully participating in employment in the project. And that's tough because that's actually where you start to change conversations around dinner tables that start to change legacies and improve quality of living and standard of living for generations that come. So I think that what we need to do is continue to, it's great that we're getting to equity conversations, but really looking at those opportunities from a holistic standpoint, making sure that we're holding our partners accountable with respect to employment expectations, and that's preparation for employment, and it's also about ensuring that you see Indigenous people at all levels in a corporation, at all levels, not just, you know, clearing the land and getting ready for construction and then construction, but, you know, looking at your supply chain and your employment practices as a means to, like, really embrace reconciliation. And that's something that I really, really hope we'll see huge strides made in the next decade.
And those companies that have done well in economic reconciliation have largely Indigenous people positioned within their C-suite as well, right? Not
Yes.
just entry-level positions, but putting our people where they rightfully belong in leadership positions.
Yeah. Can I add something to that?
Please.
If you're on a board, we know that we look at diversity and inclusion numbers and we want to make sure that we have representation. Don't just look at the percentage. Look at your revolving door and ask why. Look at your retention rates. That is actually the thing that will tell you something about your internal culture, not your percentage. It's really easy, actually, to hire an Indigenous person. It's not easy for corporate Canada to retain them, and there's a reason for it.
Thank you. Elizabeth, there's a question here for you that says, when do you expect the loan guarantee program to begin operating?
That's the question of the day. I am happy that the budget approved and announced the launch of the program. And what I can say with confidence is it took over a decade to get to this point. It's not going to take a decade to get to an operational entity, but there will be some time. So we are working right now on all the program details. As you can appreciate, this is a critically important program, and making sure that we get it very well thought through and right is really important. And so that does take a bit of time. So I would like to measure where are we and what can we show 1 year from now. And I'm putting that out as a target timeline. We are working closely with NRCan on the program and various pieces that they'll be administering at the front end. But I think it's safe to say we move at the speed of business. We want to move at the speed of trust to ensure we've got the right relationships, the right partnerships. And frankly, FNMPC is a huge partner to us and a helpful ally to helping us get to where we need to on this project. So I like to say we're moving as quickly as we can, but we need to be thoughtful. We need to set this program up for success, and we need to have the right people around the table to ensure for that.
Thank you. This notion of the Major Projects Coalition has embodied that together we are stronger, right? And I just add to that none of us are as smart as all of us, right? So all of us are required to be able to move the loan guarantee program forward and give you the necessary support that you and your team require. Alicia, what are the sources of investment funds for BOAN?
Well, BOAN Social Impact, the source of investment funds is a social finance fund. So in total, the social finance fund is $750 million, and it's divided amongst 3 wholesalers. So there's us, there's Realize, and then there's Cap Finance, which is focused purely in Quebec. And we all have sort of different mandates, so we're answering a different call across Canada and also working well together and partnering together. So, you know, trying really hard to not compete, but make sure that we're serving the space in a way that really drives long-standing success for the social impact sector.
Thank you very much. And our time has just flown by. I'd like to give each of you an opportunity for some closing remarks, starting with you, Elizabeth.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank you, Dan, for including me in this panel. Really enjoyed the discussion. I am very encouraged to see that there's 1,700 people here. I was at the conference in Vancouver last year, and it continues to grow. I'm looking at how we can play a role in the economic reconciliation. Certainly, our Crown Corporation is well positioned on that, on the range of work that we do. I'd like to thank also First Nations Major Projects Coalition. NILO has been a great partner to us as well. I think there's a lot of great discussion that I've been part of, and also some key learnings as we go back into the corporate world on my end, within the Crown family as well, that I'm taking away from this conference.
Thank you. Sean?
No, just thanks. I think at Desnethe and English River, we're always open for business. We want to work with other nations, other companies. We have a business first mentality. Yeah, we'll be talking to Elizabeth because we were one of the first to stick our hands up about 2 years ago with 2 other First Nations, our friends at Kitsaki and Athabasca Basin, because all the uranium in North America is mined from northern Saskatchewan. We were proactive that we wanted to invest in Canada's next SMRs. We want this to be a fully Canadian supply chain with uranium coming from northern Saskatchewan. And you have 3 First Nations that are very supportive of the nuclear industry, with 3 generations of employees within our communities that can tell the story about working in the nuclear industry and from a non-political landscape. And so we want to get these things deployed in Saskatchewan out west, and we'll be come knocking on the federal government's door to help us out. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Alicia.
Thanks, Dan. I would like to start by saying that when it comes to social impact and frankly the broader context of venture capital or private equity, this often feels like unknown territory for many people, and it can feel a bit intimidating because, you know, there's a lot of conversation about it, but it often, I think, feels a bit Wizard of Oz-like. And at Boan, we're really excited to be part of demystifying it and opening up those doors to conversations to people who are interested in learning more and the concepts behind it and how it works. And so I hope that you won't be shy to reach out. And if there's enough people, then, you know, maybe we can look at creating specific panel conversations to really demystify it, because it's a form of capital that, when it's deployed with intention, is highly impactful, and it can be very specifically targeted. And so, you know, I hope I hope it's intriguing to people and that it makes you curious as opposed to scared.
Thank you very much.
Just got there.
And a good leader will take you to a place that you wouldn't go by yourself. So thank you very much for your leadership in the economic reconciliation space. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking our panel for their insightful comments.